Member for Bowman.
Well, Deputy Speaker, I feel somewhat like a roadie jumping on stage after the encore to speak after such an informed presentation by the member for Wannon, and I thank him for that. But I do speak because I'm one of a number of Coalition MPs very, very passionate about the broadening and the additional clarification given to our agencies to perform this most important role. And somewhat disappointed too that there's been very, very little contribution from the opposition in this debate. And of course I think Australians from Western Australia through to Queensland would hope that there would be some light shone on these reforms and some informed debate. But alas, all that we have here are a series of coalition speakers clearly articulating the importance of these changes and further strengthening the ability of our security agencies to respond, and one fairly vocal bloke from the other side who's only here because it's his shift to sit near the dispatch box on the Labor Party's side. That's unfortunate, because what we really need in here is a clear dissection and elaboration of our reforms, and any reasonable criticism is warmly welcomed. But all we've had is a hysterical and somewhat weird intervention from the Greens. And these comments about it being the recommendations of a club are plainly preposterous, and I really think really shows how far the Greens as a movement have moved from the desires of young Australians to see that we remain a free but ultimately law-abiding democracy into the future. It's disappointing that they're not at the table and supporting what are really common-sense reforms, and it exposes within the Greens movement a fundamental lack of understanding of exactly how law enforcement operates, and that's a challenge for them. I want to make 4 points in this speech today, and the first one is about the changing environment. And senior security officials have pointed out to us the change that has occurred, even in the last couple of years, particularly since the Boston Marathon bombing. The shift from highly planned, elaborate and long time frame based terrorism incidents through to almost unpredictable and spontaneous ones. And this sets the most painfully difficult and challenging question for our security services. For them to be prepared for one individual, inspired by something they read online, to grab a knife and in the name of some crazy and despotic movement carry out a crime in this beautiful and peaceful country is the challenge that we both face as a nation. But we are also putting to security forces to say, protect us from this kind of conduct, because that conduct is obviously performed to create fear and to take away the freedoms that we enjoy. And so we are in a constant battle as advanced and developed economies against those who intend to undermine it. Look, the second one is that we are moving, as the recent Prime Ministerial address to this joint chamber pointed out, and David Cameron, the Prime Minister, is the degree to which the internet, and I see the Parliamentary Secretary is in the chamber as well, the internet remains still in many ways an ungoverned space. And he put a challenge to us as another developed economy and a member of Five Eyes, just the degree to which we can continue to brook such an ungoverned space. We have a challenge obviously in social services to engage every young Australian and give them opportunity. But let's accept as a multicultural and an immigration-based economy that we have large numbers of young people often coming here definitely with hope, but not always with a trust that they will have opportunity to enjoy what other Australians enjoy. And talking to senior security officials, they tell me that our greatest challenge is actually surprisingly homogenous. They are young people. They are of certain backgrounds. They are easily influenced. But the one thing that draws almost 90–95% of them as a common denominator is their lack of opportunity, their lack of connectedness to the real economy. And it's at this level that we can stop just talking about whoever one case is who perpetrates violence in our community and start thinking of our broader challenge that we leave 130,000 people in this country every year graduating from school but not even skilled enough to get the most basic of entry-level minimum wage jobs. And so long as you have those sort of numbers entering the welfare system every year and around 140,000 people transitioning from income replacement as an under 24-year-old to New Start, then we have large areas where, in many cases, young members of minorities can hide in areas of zero opportunity, surrounded by an Australia that can offer so much. And we can't guarantee that that opportunity is homogeneously spread amongst every family group, among every young male who ultimately is drawn to more romantic or exciting pursuits through online connection with vigilante and terrorist groups overseas. So look, that'll be an unending challenge. And the idea that we can just intensively case manage every family, that we can monitor what every family unit does, is completely beyond the means and the capabilities of our normal social services organisations. And so we now trust in the intelligence services to be able to first pick up those signs of risk, those signs of dangerous behaviour, those signs that they're engaged in internet chat groups, peer-to-peer groups, and obviously engaging illegal and terrorist groups. It's a challenge of enormous complexity, but one which so far we've done well. And it really, really impressed me that a number of months ago, those services were able to detail to me that they'd identified up to 60 people overseas who had left effectively to be part of to be part of military tourism. No other reason to travel except the thrill and the excitement of being part of a terrorist organisation fighting in a war in a foreign land. And this is of enormous concern, and many have mentioned this before. But secondly, we identified, even more concerningly, up to 100 Australians right here at home facilitating those people. And for the first time, these reforms go beyond a strictly defined terrorist act to also identify those who are supporting those who are training with extremist groups. And this is a very, very big and, I think, important part of the reforms, both in the two tranches that have already passed through this Parliament and the changes that we debate tonight. So effectively, what we are doing here is enhancing those control order regimes to enable the AFP to seek control orders in relation to an even broader range of individuals who are of a security concern, and to streamline that application process. Again, we are in here having a debate about elements of this legislation with not an echo, with not a peep from the opposition about the merits or otherwise of this legislation. Second, we're facilitating ASIS to support and cooperate with the ADF on military operations, and that's been very clearly defined in the legislation, the degree to which that information is utterly vital to the ADF in performing their role, but in no way allows them to encroach upon what are their terms of engagement. And lastly, in enhancing the arrangements for the provision of an emergency ministerial authorisation, and I think they've been adequately detailed by the previous speaker. And this is particularly around enabling them to activate a control order in relation to those who are enabling or those who are specifically recruiting for those causes. Look, Deputy Speaker, these are enormously divisive issues, and I'm not going to beat around the bush to say that what's occurred in the last few months is at the heart of even greater tensions between mainstream Australians and some of our ethnic minorities. I'm also prepared to say that it lies at the heart of the recent debate brought to this place about the wearing of a burqa in public and, heaven forbid, trying to ban the wearing of a burqa for people who visit this great building. And these were completely unnecessary distractions that a mature country should have been able to see right through and not in any way entertain what I think was such a frivolous and puerile debate. But we got caught up in it. And I was compelled to write a piece in the Daily Telegraph saying we have much greater things to worry about than the way a woman chooses to dress, and certainly what she chooses to wear when she visits this building. Because above what we wear is what is inside. And I completely respect the preeminence of a security official to clear everyone who enters this building, as they should every private building, according to security requirements, and as one who enters any private building can be asked to do so by relevant security staff who are employed to do that very job. But once you are cleared, by definition, you should be able to go on your way and wear precisely what you chose to wear that day. At any time, security officials can elect to again screen you if they choose. No problem with that. But these are allowing the experts to make those calls. And it shouldn't be up to us to be making calls about how an individual chooses to dress. But I come back to the fact that many of these debates were activated, even animated, by the fear in the mainstream Australian population that fomenting within large minorities in this country, in particular, were young people being distracted, young people being drawn, and ultimately young people being engaged in wars for which Australia should be playing little part, and certainly not engaging with a group like IS. Well, it's happened, and people have left the country already. There are still people attempting to leave, and that, Deputy Speaker, is just a measure of the challenge that we face in bringing this to the halt. But in the last few months, the message is absolutely clear. Thanks to the previous two tranches and this legislation tonight, you cannot be confused. You can't be mistaken. If you leave our shores and engage with this group, you are breaking the law and you're going to face enormous consequences. You will face potential prosecution. There is no reversal of the onus of proof. But if you've been to these regions, Deputy Speaker, and you can't provide adequate reasons to explain why, then in fact you are at risk of prosecution. And I think every Australian would say that is utterly reasonable. If you're going to travel to these particular regions, then you need to be able to give some reasonable explanation for why you're there. And I think Australians would expect that. Look, my final point that I make tonight is one of youth engagement. And I just want to say that in many cases, as a multi-religion nation and proud of the cultural diversity, there will be very little change that we can bring about with religious, internecine and intersectoral differences from outside. Ultimately, if we're going to fix the greater problem that is racking most of Western Asia, these changes must come from within. These changes must come from those community groups themselves. And it's not enough for those of us outside of those groups to become increasingly more hysterical or more shrill about it. We cannot change many of these elements of this debate from the outside. We have law enforcement that will identify those that breach our social expectations and our social norms of what is, I think, reasonable, peace-loving behaviour. And those laws are there. But ultimately we need to go one step further, and we need to support freedom-loving, peace-loving members of those ethnic minority groups to look within themselves and be the early warning system to identify youths going off the tracks. And it doesn't matter what they are facing, whether those challenges be drugs, law-breaking, violence, or in this case, engaging with terrorist groups. We most rely on those closest to those individuals. We cannot turn those people against us. If those people are communicating with us and are free to report and are confident that they can do so, we have a chance at helping these young people. At the moment, what we've seen are significant changes the Coalition has delivered to allow ASIS, our information services and security services, to do their job better. And I'm proud, very proud, to be part of a government that has an ear listening to those agencies and are utterly committed to delivering to them the reforms and the legislation that will enable them to do their job into the future as well as they possibly can.